We are going to talk about Psalm 83. This was by popular request, and by popular, I mean Penny. That's the only person who requested it. But we decided we're going to cover it regardless because it's a relevant topic to today's time. Psalm 83, for any of you who might not be familiar, it is a beautiful but also a dangerous prayer given by Asaph, okay? When he feels, or he's talking about a time when Israel is surrounded by its enemies. And he knows that when that time comes, it's not just about the Israeli Defense Forces. It's not just about your allies. It's about having to depend on God and no one but God. So just to start out, we're going to read the psalm. Now, we prayed here a little minute ago, but we're going to read the whole psalm, and then we'll come back and talk about it. So the title of the psalm is given in my Bible is, "O God, do not keep silence." So Psalm 83, verse 1 says, a song of or psalm of Asaph. Keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thy peace, and be not still, O God. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden ones. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Eden, and the Ishmaelites of Moab, and the Hagarenes, Jabal, and Ammon, and Amalek, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre. Asher also is joined with them. They have holpen the children of Lot, Selah. Do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jabin at the brook of Kison, which perished at Endor, that they became as dung for the earth. Make their nobles like Oreb and like Zeb. Yea, let, all their princes as Zebah and as Zalmunna, who said, Let us take to ourselves the houses of God in possession. O my God, make them like a wheel, as the stubble before the wind, as the fire burneth a wood, and as the flame setteth the mountains on fire. So persecute them with thy tempest, and make them afraid with thy storm. Fill their faces with shame, that they may seek thy name, O Lord. Let them be confounded and troubled forever. Yea, let them be put to shame and perish, that men may know that thou, whose name alone is Jehovah, art the most high over all the earth. All right, so that psalm is full of information. There's a lot of different Christians that have a lot of different views. They read that psalm and they come to a number of different conclusions as to what it's actually talking about, okay? Some people read that psalm, and a lot of commentators take this view and say it's historical. This is something that happened in the past. Some people say, well, no, it's prophetic. It's something that's going to happen in the future. And some people say, no, it's imagery. It's spiritual. It's talking about being surrounded by your enemies and having to depend on God. And he's using the nations around Israel as kind of a way to give you an allegory, an idea of what that would be like. So there's a lot to unpack in this psalm before you come to any one conclusion, all right? Now, we're the Gentile church. I don't believe anyone here has Jewish heritage. If you do and didn't know that, sorry. But we've been living in the times of the Gentiles. That's been happening throughout the church age. Ever since the church was born, up until now, we see that especially after 70 AD, Jerusalem would be trodden down by the Gentiles through the times of the Gentiles. And that happens up until the Antichrist is reigning, right? So the times of the Gentiles are nearing an end. We're seeing all kinds of signs that everything is coming back. Bless you, by the way. I think that's your fourth sneeze. But listen, everybody gets one. If you sneeze again, there's no more blessing. No, I'm just teasing. Now, again, the world's showing all kinds of signs that we're nearing the end. I think there's tremendous evidence. But the one thing that's more evidence to me than anything else is what's going on in Israel. Israel, and in particular Jerusalem, but the entire nation of Israel, has always seemed to be a timepiece for God, a timepiece for prophecy. You keep an eye on what's happening there, you see how things are progressing through the prophetic timeline. Now, as a church, we, and I mean all of us here who have accepted Jesus Christ as Savior, are trying to stay true to the faith of the Bible, trying to stay true to the word of God. So the world's becoming increasingly sinful. Sin is becoming increasingly common to where it's the norm. And that leads us, as hard as we fight it, to become more lukewarm. As hard as we fight it, we end up losing the amount of love that we had for people who are struggling, people who are dealing with problems. It's a lot harder to love others and to have pity for others when disaster strikes. Okay. Now, Jesus told us that was going to happen. That in and of itself is a sign of the times. The fact that we struggle to love, that shows us where we're at in a time frame, including the lukewarmness of the church. Now, I believe those who take Bible prophecy in a more serious sense. Now, I don't say in a literal sense, because sometimes things are meant to be used as imagery, but in a serious sense, where you take it as it's written for what it's for, being a direct correlation to what he's trying to show. We look at Daniel's 70th week, this period of time where God is dealing with Israel. It was paused after the first 69 weeks, but that 70th week is something that's coming up. And when it comes up, it's going to start out looking real good for Israel. But then through it, the Antichrist, who's kind of running the earth, at least from his point of view, he ends up turning against Israel with all the other nations of the world that he forces under his hand. They end up surrounding Israel, and they're surrounded by their enemies. So there is no question that there's a time coming when everyone will be against Israel. But don't we today start to see the shadows of that? Don't we see nations that used to be 90% pro-Israel turning into anti-Israel, even though their government policies still say, no, no, we're for Israel?
And so many countries are putting pressure on the United States. If you don't do this, we're going to keep attacking you, or it's going to go.
Anyone who supports Israel is being threatened, right? Now, again, this is not a call to support Israel. As a Christian, our call is to spread the gospel. Israel and that entire region belongs to who? It's God's land, not my land. I'm not here to support one side or another. Don't ever forget, throughout Israel's history, there have been righteous kings and there have been evil kings. There's been wonderful leaders, there have been wicked leaders. You don't know what God's plans are. You only know what he tells us in his word. And our job is to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, spread the good news. It's not to support one group or another group. Those who live in Israel today will all have to flee or be destroyed by the Antichrist. It's not our job to keep Israel in Israel. That's on God. He's made the plan, he'll carry it out. So do our job and spread the good news. So we don't need to wait for an Antichrist to see a world filled with anti-Semitism, though, do we? We're already seeing it as the days go by. We see it more and more every day. The Bible actually tells us that this is what's going to happen. It tells us that there is going, that the word Jerusalem is going to be a cup of trembling. The city of Jerusalem will infuriate people. It also tells us that being a Jew will be a byword, right? It'll be an offensive thing to be called a Jew at some point. And we see throughout history, there's been periods where that's gotten real bad and periods that seems to have gotten better. But still today, 2,000 years later, we still see tremendous amounts of anti-Semitism in the world. Okay. Yes, sir.
A couple of time-bound words. When. So Jerusalem will be a couple of trembling when all nations are gathered against her. Right. So there's a time for that. And also until Luke 21:24b, which you just mentioned, Jerusalem will be trodden underfoot of the Gentiles until the times of Gentiles be fulfilled. You go to Romans 11:25, that same word until comes up, you know, and so blindness has befallen Israel in part until the times of Gentiles be fulfilled. So there's coming a day when the times of Gentiles are fulfilled.
Absolutely.
When all nations are gathered against Israel, and then it'll be a cup of trembling.
Yeah. And on top of that, that points out that also nothing surprises God. There's nothing outside of his timeline. It's not a matter of Jesus only was going to go to the cross when they were ready to capture him. No, he knew when the time was. He knew that it was not yet his time, that it was his time. He made things happen according to when was the appointed time. And that same thing holds true for his return. And that same thing holds true for the future of Israel, for the future of this entire world. So we don't have to stress or worry about that. we need to worry about doing what he asked us to do, right? So when it comes to the prophecies of both Israel and the nations around it, the Bible is filled with these prophecies, and even with Israel's enemies and what becomes of them, okay? Here's a few examples of some of the ancient enemies of Israel that there's prophecies about that are relevant to what we're going to read in Psalm 83. So in Isaiah 17, we read a little bit about Syria. So in Isaiah 17, verse 1, it says, the burden of Damascus. Damascus, for those of you who don't know, is the capital of Syria, the oldest inhabited city in the world. It says, behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. This is verse down to verse 3. The fortress also shall cease from Ephraim, and the kingdom from Damascus, and the remnant of Syria. So it's not just Damascus, it's the whole nation. They shall be as the glory of the children of Israel, saith the Lord of hosts. So just like the northern kingdom of Israel was defeated, right? Syria is going to be just essentially leveled, right? Damascus is going to be wiped away. Down in verse 12 of the same chapter says, woe to the multitude of many people, which make a noise like the noise of the sea. This is in Isaiah 17. And to the rushing of nations that make a rushing like the rushing of mighty waters. The nations shall rush like the rushing of many waters, but God shall rebuke them, and they shall flee far off, and shall be chased as the chaff of the mountains before the wind, like a rolling thing before the whirlwind. And behold, at evening tide, trouble. Pay attention to this. In the evening, trouble. And before the morning, he is not. This is the portion of them that spoil us, and the lot of them that rob us. So the fate of Syria, and particularly Damascus, in one night will go from being a city to being wiped out. Previous to today. Now again, this can be something supernatural, but let's say it's not. This can be previous to today's weaponry, modern weaponry. Can you wipe out a city in a single? I mean, how long would you have to burn it, right? It would take some time. Unless you had one powerful, many megaton nuclear missile, that could happen pretty quickly, right? So it's a very interesting thing. We see the technology available today for such things, right? And the fate of Syria is not going to be very different from the fate of Russia and Turkey and Iran and those who strike against Israel, again, from the Bible. Now, these modern nations, and by the way, when I go through this entire chapter, and really when it comes to all biblical prophecy, we give our best estimates of the nations that are referred to here, based on what we know of descendants and where people settled and where they went. It may not be 100% accurate, but as far as we know, this seems to be the best estimates. And the way the world is sitting right now, it sure seems like these are good candidates for which countries today are represented by their ancient names, okay? So in Ezekiel 38, one of the most popular prophetic books, popular prophetic chapters regarding end time wars, it says in 38 verse 2, this is about some other nations besides just Syria. He says in Ezekiel 38:2, Son of man, set thy face against Gog in the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal, and prophesy against them, and say, thus saith the Lord God, behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal, and I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws. I will bring thee forth and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with a shield and helmet, Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters and all his bands, and many people with thee. So again, what are these countries? What are we talking about in Ezekiel 38? Well, the land of Magog is generally thought to be southern Russia, okay? And it's connected to the Scythians, and the Scythians is who Josephus said settled the land of Russia. Meshach and Tubal, they represent modern day Turkey, okay? Persia, well, in the 1930s, guess what? Iran was still called Persia, right? So we know that one we don't have to guess much about. Ethiopia is considered to be northern Africa and is still named Ethiopia. Libya remains Libya, and Gomer and Togarmah, they're central and eastern Turkey. Okay, so we already had different parts of Turkey all represented here. So verse 7 says, be thou prepared and prepare for thyself, thou and all thy company that are assembled unto thee, and be thou a guard unto them. After many days, so we're talking end times here, thou shalt be visited. In the latter years, thou shalt come into the land that is brought back from the sword, and is gathered out of many people against the mountains of Israel, which have been always waste, but is brought forth out of the nations, and they shall dwell safely in them. So these nations, there's been a whole bunch of countries we just listed here. They are going to come and strike Israel in the latter years. So we see there are prophecies of countries coming to attack Israel. And they're only going to attack Israel after Israel has been restored to the land after having been scattered for many years. There's a reason we know these are end times prophecies, not historical events, because this has to happen after Israel's put back in the land. So battles like this have not yet happened. It's something that'll happen soon. So verse 11 is going to tell you why these countries will attack Israel. He says in Ezekiel 38:11, and thou shalt say, I will go up to the land of unwalled villages. I will go to them that are at rest, that dwell safely, all of them dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates, to take a spoil and to take a prey, to turn thine hand upon the desolate places that are now inhabited, and upon the people that are gathered out of the nations, which have gotten cattle and goods that dwell in the midst of the land. So the reason that this group of nations under Russia are going to attack Israel is they're going to say, oh, look, now they're defenseless. Let's go. And we need to go because we are desperate. We need to have a victory of some sort. We need the spoils of war. They're desperate. Do we see a country today? Do we see Russia today that is dealing with desperation, needing a victory, needing something? What if the nation of Israel had to reestablish its boundaries because of some active wars going on, and all of their defensive systems, their Iron Dome, all these different things were temporarily being rearranged, and somebody were to say, okay, now they're defenseless while they're doing all this. This is the time to strike. Again, these are all things that could happen next week, right? Down to verse 18 of Ezekiel 38, and I promise we will get to Psalm 83. We're just trying to do a little intro here. So Ezekiel 38, verse 18 says, it shall come to pass at the same time when Gog shall come against the land of Israel, saith the Lord God, that my fury shall come up in my face. For in my jealousy and in the fire of my wrath have I spoken. Surely in that day there shall be a great shaking in the land of Israel, so that the fishes of the sea and the fowls of heaven and the beasts of the field and all creeping things that creep upon the earth and all the men that are upon the face of the earth shall shake at my presence, and the mountains shall be thrown down, and the steep places shall fall, and every wall shall fall to the ground. There's going to be something felt worldwide, right? God is going to take matters into his own hands, and the whole world's going to suffer in fear of the destruction that's coming, okay? And the details of how they're going to dispose of the bodies is given in the next chapter, which we won't go through right now, in Ezekiel 39. And it talks about how much of the Russian nation is wiped out, right? And it's a tremendous amount. And the whole world's terrified. Things do not end well for those nations listed in the alliance of Ezekiel 38. So with that kind of picture of things being prophetic, what do we make of Psalm 83? All right. The nations that are listed in Psalm 83 and the nations they represent today, they have been enemies of Israel in the past, and some of them are prophesied to be enemies in the future. Now, one of the common arguments, if you guys pick up a commentary and you're going to look at what people think Psalm 83 is about, as I said, most people say it is historical. It's something that happened in the past. So Asaph is said to have written this psalm. He actually wrote about 10 of these psalms in a row. And they say, well, no, it's not Asaph at all that wrote this. It's one of the descendants of Asaph, okay? And that actually comes from a passage in 2 Chronicles chapter 20, okay? Because there was actually a alliance that came against Israel at that time that included some of these nations, and God again delivered them. And it says that a descendant of Asaph had given a prophecy that they'd be victorious, and this is the prayer of that descendant of Asaph. So that I'll read that passage to you. 2 Chronicles chapter 20, it says in verse 1, it came to pass after this also that the children of Moab, this is going to be a nation we talk about in Psalm 83, and the children of Ammon, another nation we talk about, and with them other beside the Ammonites, so there was other groups that were involved in this alliance, came against Jehoshaphat to battle. And there came some that told Jehoshaphat, saying, there comes a great multitude against thee from beyond the sea on this side, Syria. So there's another nation mentioned along with them. Again, that's mentioned in Psalm 83. And behold, they be in Hazazon Tamar, which is En Gedi. And Jehoshaphat feared and set himself to seek the Lord, and proclaimed a fast throughout all of Judah. So during this battle, Jehoshaphat turned to God, said, what are we going to do? Then you skip down to verse 14 of 2 Chronicles 20. It says, then upon Jahaziel, the son of Zechariah, the son of Benaiah, the son of Jael, the son of Mattaniah, a Levite of the sons of Asaph. Again, Asaph is our author of this psalm. So they're saying maybe this is the guy that wrote it, and he's a descendant of Asaph. Came the Spirit of the Lord in the midst of the congregation. And he said, hearken ye, all Judah, and ye inhabitants of Jerusalem, and thou, King Jehoshaphat, thus saith the Lord unto you, be not afraid nor dismayed, for by reason of the great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's. Tomorrow go you down against them. Behold, they come up by the cliff of Ziz, and you shall find them at the end of the brook before the wilderness of Jeruel. You shall not need to fight in this battle. Set yourselves, stand ye still, and see the salvation of the Lord with you, O Judah and Jerusalem. So the people of Israel proceed to go up the next day. And again, I'm not reading, I'm trying to paraphrase it as best I can. They go the next day, and instead of fighting, they sing praises to God. Okay. The alliance that was coming up against them actually falls apart because they attack Mount Seir, and then they begin to fight amongst one another. So in 2 Chronicles 20, verse 22 says, and when they began to sing and praise, the Lord set ambushments against the children of Ammon and Moab, and Mount Seir, which were come against Judah, and they were smitten. For the children of Ammon and Moab stood up against the inhabitants of Seir. They were fighting the people in Mount Seir, okay? And everyone helped to destroy another. So again, many Bible scholars, I won't say all of them, but many, they believe that this was the battle that Psalm 83 is referring to. If that is true, this song would be historical, right? The psalm is historical. And the prayer in Psalm 83 would be fulfilled because God's the one who fought the battle. Israel did not fight it. They simply praised God. I don't think they're wrong. I think that God did fight the battle. I think that, yes, there was an alliance, and yes, that's certainly true. And it's also, there's a spiritual approach, like we talked about. Sometimes we feel like we're surrounded by our enemies. And this is a great imagery of being surrounded by your enemies, but still trusting God and having victory. I think that's also correct. But some people believe that Psalm 83 is a reference not just to a prophetic battle, but the final battle under the Antichrist, whenever all of Israel is surrounded by its nations. But I don't think the song refers to that. I think it is prophetic, even though all these other things will happen. So the reality is that the events described in this psalm, both the alliance that comes and the judgments asked for, have never happened. Those judgments have not yet been fulfilled. So that's one of the reasons I believe this psalm is going to be prophetic. So today, this kind of gets into our direct study now. Israel. Does anyone know what the population of Israel is today? About roundabouts?
7.6.
Close, 9.5 million. All right, it's about 9.5 million. It is surrounded by an Arab world, and nobody knows the exact number. Does anyone know about how many people are in the Arab world? About 420 million, okay? Not quite as populous as India and China and places like that, but still quite a few people. Many or most of them wish to see Israel not exist as a nation. Now, that's nothing new. That actually started way back thousands of years ago in the Old Testament, right? In Genesis 16:11 says, talking about Ishmael, says, the angel of the Lord said unto her, unto Hagar, behold, thou art with child, and shall bear a son, and shall call his name Ishmael, for God has heard me, because the Lord has heard thy affliction. And he will be a wild man, and his hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. And then in Galatians chapter 4, verse 29, we get some insight as to how Ishmael treated Isaac. He says, but as then he that was born after the flesh, that's Ishmael, persecuted him that was born after the spirit, even so it is now. So that means that that persecution never ended. So Ishmael was told he would beget 12 princes. He would become many nations, not just Isaac, right? Ishmael would become many nations. Isaac, on the other hand, became a few nations, right? He had Jacob and Esau, and of course, Jacob became Israel, whereas Esau had the Edomites and such. So long before the Roman Empire struggled against all these different nations, and long before these different countries that are currently in the Middle East fought against each other, we know that Israel has constantly been battling its enemies, okay? In 70 AD, what was the big thing that happened? Jerusalem was destroyed, and shortly thereafter, the Jews, the majority of them, were exiled and dispersed in the nations. Do you guys know what the Roman emperor renamed that region? Right.
Syria, Palestina.
Syria, Palestina, thank you. So in 135 AD, the city of Jerusalem that had been destroyed was rebuilt, but not as a Jewish city. It was rebuilt as a Roman city. So that Roman city in 614 AD was captured by the Persians, and in 629 was recaptured by the Christians. In 638, guess who captured it? It was the Muslims this time. And until 1099 was under Muslim control, which then it was recaptured during what we call the Crusades, right? It was then recaptured by the Muslims in 1187 and continued to change hands back and forth until 1250 AD, when the Muslims dismantled the walls of Jerusalem, essentially make it an indefensible city. And more or less, it becomes desolate. There's a few people living there, but nobody else struggles to conquer it and to keep it because it's indefensible. You can't hold the city. And for most of history since then, there have been some Arab people, some Jewish people, all kind of wandering through that land, but no specific nation occupied the land. They considered it kind of like part of southern Syria. When the Ottoman Empire began, that was a Muslim empire that came through, it ruled the Middle East in the 1500s, and they rebuilt the walls of Jerusalem, okay? So that area, again, like I said, was considered part of southern Syria, and that was true until the early 1900s. It's not a nation of its own, nor does anyone care about that land. It's not like anything special for people. So the British in the 1900s, they occupied that land after defeating the Ottoman Empire in World War I. And they established something called the British Mandate. And they're wanting to recreate a home nation or a home state for the Jewish nation, and also to help create a state for the Arabs living in that same area. So they take the land that was this whole region of Palestina, right, or Syria, Palestina, and they end up giving 77% of the property to the current nation that is called Jordan, all right? The rest, the 23% that remains, was then going to be the Jewish homeland of Israel. That Jewish homeland of Israel was then further subdivided to provide a Palestinian state for the non-Jewish Arabs that did not wish to live under Jewish rule. Okay, that kind of brings us up till where the situation is now. Yeah, I know, I got it. Yeah.
So World War I, and the Britons were running out of gunpowder. You know this story?
You go ahead.
And there was a Jewish scientist that came up with synthetic gunpowder and saved Britain in World War I. And after that, Lord Balfour came up with a declaration called the Balfour Declaration, which set aside all that land for Israel,
Mhm.
which they only got like 13% of.
Yeah,
after World War
got a
II.
lot less than they were expecting. So that means, again, with all of the stuff that I just told you, that the only time that Psalm 83 could occur, because all of this stuff has happened, all right? This events of Psalm 83, because it had to happen after Israel was established as a nation, and it was written during the time of King David. Remember, Asaph was living at the same time as David, that if this has not happened since Israel is created as a nation, it has to be prophetic. It has to be something that'll yet happen. So it is something that couldn't have happened during 70 AD till 1948. So what does that leave from 1948 till today? So up to this point, all the nations that we're going to talk about, and we're going to start with verse 1 as soon as we get back from our break, in Psalm 83 have had an issue with Israel and have been to war with Israel at some point in Israel's history. But during the days of the judges, ever since the days of the judges, they've never joined as a big unified front against Israel. All right. So this confederation has not happened, at least not yet. And I think it's going to happen and probably soon. We'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll start with verse 1. Yes, sir.
What was that verse reference in Galatians?